Ka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga. Ake mā kina ki wita, ki mā taratara ki tai. I te ake ana, i te arakura, i tio, he hoka, he hauhu, tihe, mauiora.
Sees the wind from the west, sees the wind from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the reds at dawn come with sharpened ear, touch trust, promise, and glorious day. Kia ora. Tēnā koutou. So, today we have a lightish agenda, but I expect a lot of discussion around our items, because nearing the end we're going to come up with some stark revelations on what's happening in the climate change space. So I encourage us all to keep an open mind, open heart, and an intergenerational lens.
Whoa!
So I'm going to
hard time for having big speeches.
So I'm going to start with a whakatauki, and it goes: Ko ngā pai tawhiti whaia kia tata, ko ngā pai tata whakamua kia tina. And that talks about the potential for tomorrow depends on what we do today. So with that, I have apologies from Councillor William, Councillor Lambert, Api Tāpine, and we will have Councillor Foss join us as soon as he lands from the far north. So can I have a mover and a seconder for the apologies, please? Councillor Foley and Councillor Barker. Thank you. Our next item is conflict of interest declaration. Is there any conflicts for today's agenda? None. Thank you. Number 3, confirmation of previous minutes. Are there any alterations to the previous minutes of our committee? No, thank you. Nobody's had a mover of the previous minute. Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Second, Councillor Graham. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against. Kapai moved. Right.
Matters arising, Madam Chair?
Not on the agenda?
Rising.
It's not an agenda item?
No, it's not an agenda item.
It's a chairman's liberty.
But notices.
Yes, live exports.
What's that? Is that a notice?
Oh, I think it's a minor item.
Minor items.
Oh, it's a
Okay,
minor
we'll leave
item.
it. Sorry, any notices? None? Fantastic. Number 4, follow-up of items from previous meetings.
So, Chair, there is a paper there. Tom Skinner isn't here today, but I see he's added some comment to the status box for the water security topic.
So any questions regarding the follow-ups?
I'll move the follow-ups be received.
Okay. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second?
Councillor Curtin, thank you. All those, do we have follow-ups? Do we have to do those? Yep. Yep, fantastic. Okay. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, thank you. Call for minor items. Councillor Curtin.
Yes, minor items this time, yes. Yes, livestock exports.
Good to it, minor items, good night. Yeah. Reporting.
Reporting.
Water Security Group. What's the Maori name for that? Our group.
Yes, thank you. Right. First item, information item, the Tūtira Regional Park and Tangoio Soil Conservation Reserve Forest Harvest Update.
Excellent. So I'll just ask Ben to come down. Ben Douglas, part of our Open Spaces team and manages our forestry portfolio. So Ben will just take you through the key issues. This is really an update of where we are with harvest. We're planning to bring the Tutira replanting plan back to you in February for a decision. But Ben will just give a brief update of where we are in terms of our forestry activity in Tangoio and the other block. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Chris.
I te tūtai, ngā mihi kia koutou i ngā māngai o ngā tangata whenua, o ngā hāpuri o tēnei te rohi o te mātua Māui, ko tēnei te kōrero tuatahi tāku ki a koutou nō nei tēnā koutou. So first time I'm speaking in front of the new council, so thank you, Ron. So just an update, we are pretty close to starting logging in these two properties. Some of you new to council may not be familiar, have a great deal of familiarity with them, so I'll give you a bit of background. The Tūtira Regional Park there is a council-owned park up at, obviously on the shores of Lake Tūtira. 464 hectares, actually it's all outlined in that paper, so you would have had a bit of a background. And the Tangoio Soil Conservation Reserve, Crown-owned land that we manage under the Soil Conservation Reserve and Rivers Control Act. They're a bit different in that the Tūtira Regional Park, the pines were planted initially for erosion control, and they were good for that purpose because they established quickly and they provided a cover. Long term, all the results of community and tangata whenua consultation is that we want to be managing out of them, but it's how to do that effectively and not lose that benefit of the great erosion control and while bringing in the natives. So that's the process we've gone through, and we've got a good plan there. I did have that plan to bring to council today, but there were there was a bit of debate around some of the financial figures due to the carbon returns, which we thought will take the time and really make sure that we get a good picture of, good agreement on what that is. Bearing in mind it'll be quite a high profile project, and it has a lot of bearing on obviously the free white place movements. So that's looking down over the pines there. To the left of the screen, you can see a lot of scrub and so forth starting to revert. The whole park, all the hill country over the park is in the process of regeneration. There's about 130 hectares planted in a manuka plantation from 2011 to 2013, and that's really promoted and sped up the regeneration. The regional park vision from the draft park plan, which is still going through consultation. I guess to summarise it, it's basically a multi-value property. There's a heck of a lot going on there, and there's a lot of values which take sort of careful management to align. This is the harvest plan. So the operations that will be happening this coming summer. There is a road to be built down from Ridgemount Road up the top here. Construct these skid sites, take these top trees out, and let that road sort of cure and pack down over the summer. So then next summer, when it's ready for logging, it's a lot more resilient and it can hold up to the trucks, and we're not going to have those sediment issues. And also we will get down the bottom here and put the first bit of this road in here and take those trees out. This summer also, it's planned that the sediment trap, which is outside my brief, but there'll be a sediment trap constructed toward the lakefront there that no doubt you've all been involved with. And the first of the clearfowl will start next summer.
It will be an absolute clearfowl.
Clearfowl is in compartments. So this is the first compartment that will go. So the lines there, the arrows indicate a hauler will sit up the top here. The arrow indicates the direction the wood will be pulled in. So the hauler will pull all of this wood to that boundary, and it will log all of that out in one hit. That's about 25 hectares. That leaves us a really good buffer to the creek. over the most part of it. And the aim then is to revegetate that as quickly as possible, get in back in quick establishing vegetation. So when we come back to log this section here, most of which are younger trees, and about 5 to 6 years time after that, this would have re-established, so we're minimising that risk of having too much open at once. When we clear foul this, half of it will drain to this catchment, which is a really good wetland system through here that will effectively deal with any sediment loss, and this side drains across this big wide flat, and we will leave that ungrazed, so we've got a good grass filter there. So it'll be, at this stage, it'll be done in 3 hits. That one there, I'm proposing that we do this part here and this part here in the same year, and I think doing that, it might seem like a lot to log at the same time, but I'm comfortable with the risks in terms of we've still got that big buffer to the stream. That any risks here are very minimal because of that big grassy flat filter and the wetland filter here.
Oh, yeah, still deletes them.
And so environmentally, I don't see that there's a significant risk, and also it means that we can get the logging done in a quick period of time, so we're minimising impacts on the park. This is part of the community consultation process that was gone through, and this was before my time, but they looked at all the different park values from soil conservation up the top being, it is a soil conservation reserve, so that's given sort of most focus, and then the cultural values, the economic, biodiversity, landscape, amenity values, and the education values. And the working group at that time was a working group comprised of community and tangata whenua and parks, regional council staff. They ranked all the different options, redwoods, eucalypts, natives, maruka, all sorts of options against those criteria. And native forests came out pretty clearly as the preferred option. So then it just left the question of how to get there, and how to get there without opening ourselves up to erosion and soil loss issues and weed problems. So then the Tangoio Reserve, that's taken out of the draft management plan for the Tangoio Soil Conservation Reserve, which also is out for consultation with Maunga Haruki Tangata at the stage. And that sums up the objectives for that property. We have a very strong relation with Maunga Haruki Tangata up there under their treaty settlement documents. And in practice that translates to a lot of work for the rangatahi and training up in the forests, payments to the Catchments fund, which are used in partnership projects with the hapu, and an agreement in the management planning for the property. So it's a bit of a balance in that property, and that it's about the soil conservation first and foremost, but because it gets no rates income, we are dependent on the logging returns to fund what we do there. So we do need to, especially bearing in mind only around 50% of it's in commercial forest, we need to be pretty careful with how we do manage the commercial forest.
Ben, it's probably worth pointing out that we manage that on behalf of LINZ, so
yeah,
it's not actually our forest, we just sort of manage it, and the funds gained from the forestry activity stay in a reserve and aren't accessible to the regional council, so it's very much an arm's length management regime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in actual fact, we have very little decision-making power in this. We are more the keepers of it rather than the directors and the owners of it.
So we have, I'd say, good decision rights about how it's harvested and how it's replanted in consultation with LINZ. So LINZ, I would say, aren't particularly hands-on. They're relying on us to manage it, but we have probably no decision-making as to what we can do with the land other than manage the forestry aspect.
That's right. But the point is that a paper comes along like we make decisions, but the point is that we are not the decision makers. There's a group of people, Mangataha, Ruru, the local community, LINZ, etc. So we are just basically the people who hold it on behalf of. That's what we do, as we should do.
Yeah, and that's the key point I wanted to make about this block.
Yeah.
As opposed to Tūtira, where we own and operate that as the regional council.
Yeah. Linz is very much hands off, and they trust our recommendation for how it's managed. Yeah. It's Tangoio Reserve, so it's 550 hectares. I guess the main point to make is there's a very long corridor of highway through it, and that's the difficulty in profitably logging, particularly if you've been up around the Devil's Elbow there, and you've looked up at the pines above the Devil's Elbow. Though that's going to be a real challenge to log that effectively. And
the quality of that forest compared to the erosion control plantings?
They're all good. They're all good trees. They've been well tended. They're well pruned, well thinned. Yeah. Yep.
Well organised forest.
Yep.
I guess the key points are we're commencing logging this year. We've got the access at Tutira, and a portion of the Tangoio block in the flat area is being harvested. Yeah.
Okay.
Right, any other questions for Ben? Or the paper? What's in the paper? Yeah.
You made a couple of points. One, it seems a little bit incredible to me that they, way back then, the regional council planted for erosion, planted pines, which we intended to harvest. Planting pines for erosion seems like a bit of an oxymoron, but it's not my question really. My question is, what's that? My question is, we need to manage the public relations, and I think you alluded to that really carefully here, because all the false news will come out, and there'll be the bad guy regional councils logging, and so we need to have a really good public relations. Are you sort of focused on that? That's to you guys.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of communications plan around the logging, we've commenced that. The Tutira part is really preparation at this point, and I guess there's a key decision to come back to council in February, which is around the replanting regime. So I think that's when we need to have good engagement with the community and make sure we get that decision right.
Yeah.
Part of it, as well as a part of the communication, is it is very important to bring these trees down, because particularly in the Devil's Elbow, if they become old and very weighty, we can get a lot of windfall and other issues. So this is part of our proactive management around safety of those areas as well. So
Just need to explain it well. That's my point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm happy to move the paper.
Second.
Could I make an amendment and ask staff to report the first EICC meeting in 2021? You said you're going to do it, so might as well put...
That's in the paper, so yeah.
It's in
No, it's not on the...
Not in the recommendation.
Not
on the recommendation. We're just receiving the paper, so it doesn't say that, but I think it's best to be on the record.
Okay, so the new recommendation is that the Environment and Integrated Catchments Committee receives and notes the Tūtira Regional Park in Tangoio Soil Conservation Reserve Forest Harvest Update Report, staff report, and request staff to report to the first EICC meeting in February 2021.
Thank you.
Sufficient? Yeah.
Excellent. We're
Fantastic.
clear now.
So we have a mover and a seconder. What's the seconder? The seconder was Councillor Graham. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Hi. Item number 7, Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast Group and Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge Collaboration. Anna. processing. Okay.
Thanks. I'm actually going to let Becky start and we'll sort of tag team throughout the
Take us away.
the presentation.
So I'm Becky Shanahan. I don't know if I've met too many of you, but I'm a scientist on the Marine and Coast team. So yeah, Anna and I are going to kind of tag team this presentation. So we're just here to update you on the Sustainable Seas and HBMAC collaboration project that we're working on. So HBMAC stands for Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast Group, but I'll refer to it as HBMAC because it's a bit of a mouthful to say several times over. And basically the project is looking at what's required to enable ecosystem-based management in the real world. A little bit of background info about HBMAC in general is that the group was formed in 2016 over perceived depletion of inshore finfish stocks and environmental degradation in Hawke's Bay. The membership of the group has evolved over the years, but we have recreational and commercial fishing interests represented. We have Tangoio and government agencies, just a few of them, including the Regional Council. And the group has met regularly since its formation in 2016. The group is not, it's not a decision-mandated group. The main focus of the group is to determine information that needs to be presented to inform good management practice. So one of the first things that the group did was to commission the Hawke's Bay Marine Information Review. So this basically collated all the information that existed about the Hawke's Bay coastal marine environment. And it was presented to council in 2016, I think. So that was the first purview of the group. And what they identified were some information gaps that were, that needed to be addressed. No? Pretty please? If I just click it. And that's how the HBMAC research roadmap was created. So this document was co-developed with everybody in the group, and it highlighted the vision of what the group was hoping to achieve, which is a healthy and functioning marine ecosystem in Hawke's Bay that supports an abundant and sustainable fishery. It also highlighted the key areas that were missing information and how to fill in those information gaps through terrestrial and coastal linkages, ecosystem and habitats, and fisheries, and how that kind of fits into the wider picture of the CMA. So that's where that document came from. And I'll let Anna take over how Sustainable Seas came in the picture.
So Sustainable Seas, if you're not familiar, is one of the national science challenges that were set up. They look at basically directing science funding into some of the key issues that New Zealand's facing. There's Sustainable Seas, our land, our water, which we are have a lot of involvement in. But Sustainable Seas' objective was to enhance utilisation of the marine space, and they knew that they had to develop a much better understanding of both the environmental and biological constraints, but also the social constraints about working in an area that's known to be the commons. The vision is very aligned with the Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast vision, so it's a healthy marine system that provides value for all New Zealanders. Now, one of the things that underpins the Sustainable Seas science management is this thing called it's really not, oh yeah it is, ecosystem-based management. You may have heard this term, you may have heard ecosystem ecosystem fisheries management. They're all basically looking at different consorts in terms of how we manage resources. So ecosystem-based management basically takes it away from the legislative or the act of parliament that actually drives the management structure and looks more at the objective you're trying to reach. It also looks at things like some of the core principles are collaborative decision making, evidence basis, it's tailored to meet local needs. We've got sustainability, it adapts, so we're not stuck within a policy framework that we find is not actually working, it is able to be evolved. Based on co-governance, and it actually includes humans along with this environmental constraint area. So it looks at it from a socio-ecological perspective. And that's quite an important definition there.
Socio-ecological perspective.
Socio-ecological, so it's putting humans back into the ecology of our systems. So it's making sure that we're meeting the needs both for humans as well as for the organisms, plants, animals, and the systems that are living there.
But no humans ever left the environment.
No, you're right. So basically what happened is Sustainable Seas, they got their funding for Tranche 1 and they went away and developed a heap of tools. But then we kind of said, okay, well guys, this is great, but the tools are only useful if they can actually be used to reach the objectives, which is a better management framework for the oceans, for the coast. So that's where Hawke's Bay Regional Council, we went to Sustainable Seas, we knew that they were working in this ecosystem-based management area. We knew what we knew about our marine system. We knew what we didn't know, but could find out. But what we didn't know is, and this is where we need some more expertise coming in, is we didn't know what we didn't know.
Unknown unknowns.
Exactly. And we didn't know how to really push that into a framework that would support policy development. So that's where the co-benefit for Sustainable Seas and the Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast Group came up into this sort of area here. And it basically allows us the opportunity to access this huge research funding. Well, I say huge, the Hawke's Bay case study is slightly smaller, but we're able to actually dig into all the tools that have been developed through that Tranche 1 and access to the New Zealand specialists who are working in this area at the moment. So why is it so complex? Why is this such a big problem? Why can't we just deal with it? And this comes back to the idea that we've got a huge number or a huge amount of legislation that operates within the coastal space. Now this is from our land and freshwater out to the trenches. We sort of tend to operate in this area here, which is out to the 12 nautical mile, and that's called the territorial seas. So we've got the Fisheries Act, the Māori Fisheries Act, Conservation Act, Treaty of Waitangi Fisheries Claims, Settlement Act, Māori blah 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 blah, Wildlife Act, Biosecurity, Resource Management Act, Marine and Coastal, MACA Acts, Marine Reserves. There are a huge number or pieces of legislation that tend to be working relatively independently and not really aligned to reach objectives. And that's one of the issues that we've faced in this space. So the Hawke's Bay case study, after a little bit of petitioning, we had a really good trifecta here in terms of we had the Marine and Coast Group that was already established, and that was established based on a really good social engagement from the community here. We had Stuart Nash, who was the Fisheries Minister at the time. We also obviously have Ian and James, James used to be the DepSec for the Ministry of Fisheries, so he very clearly understands the fishery, or the Ministry of Fisheries, how that works.
What about Ian? Was he just a good fisherman?
Yeah, well, that's true.
Strong advocate.
As well. Looking one.
Any strong
If you wanted
advocate.
to improve it.
Sorry to interrupt, I just
collaborative
couldn't
skills.
resist that.
Yeah, excuse me.
So in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a big pool of money, and I want to be clear that we don't get this money. This is a Sustainable Seas project which we are collaborating with them on. So it's over 2 years, or actually now it's probably over about 4 years just with the processing. It's around $300,000. We've done stage 1 of this so far, which we'll go through, and we're just about, well, we've put in the proposal for stage 2, which we'll talk about a bit more as well. The project was co-developed with the members of Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast Group, and we provide, for HBRC, we provide in-kind support, so that's Becky and my time on the project, as well as we've got Alan Robotham, who is one of our policy planners, Nicola and Anna down the back, they're representing her today, and Barry Lynch, who is our land scientist, so he's looking at the freshwater inputs. And all the other agencies that Becky mentioned earlier, they all provide in-kind support for their own pocket of research funding, etc. So those 3 things, the coastal terrestrial linkages, ecosystems and habitats, we all have responsibility to increase our understanding of those. Ours for them, MPI or Fisheries New Zealand, around the fisheries interactions. So the first thing we did was this socio-ecological sort of assessment. What this was is it was a systems map. And the systems map looks at all the different interactions. Did we bring the systems map?
the
No.
systems map.
We can bring that down later, and we'll just keep it aside if anyone wants to have a look, but we do have a slide a bit later. Early on in the discussions with Sustainable Seas, we identified 2 main stresses that we would be interested in looking at how they interact. One was sediments from freshwater, so land-based sediments getting into the marine system. The other was the seafloor disturbance caused by fisheries-related activities, bottom contact. Now, because these are 2 different pieces of legislation governed by 2 different management or Crown agencies and local government agencies, the opportunity to really do that, it's quite a great opportunity. And what we did working with the group is look at all the different drivers. So what causes it, what are some of the factors that influence it, and how they interrelate. And it created this systems map, which Becky is going to head into now.
Yeah, so Anna sort of just gave a brief overview, basically, but each of the workshops we aim to accomplish different things. So the first one was just to discuss the two sort of main trends that the group, two issues that the group's focusing on, so freshwater sediments and the benthic structure and health. So the first thing that we did was to draw trends of what we thought, so the fear of what it would end up like if nothing changed, or a worst case scenario, and then business as usual, what we thought might happen and what the hope is. Then after that, each person had to draw out the factors that they thought were contributing to those trends, anything that they could think of that was relevant to what those trends were. And then we grouped all of them together as a group. It was a painstaking process. And then we also drew out how all those factors were related to each other. So that was the initial sort of process. And then we have a consultant that sort of builds these maps. So he took that information back, built sort of a loose map, met with each person individually to sort of get a sense of whether or not he was understanding the process properly. Everybody was sort of on the same page. And then, and then so for the next workshop, he drew up, this is a draft version of the report. And we all sat around the table and looked at sort of whether or not that made sense, if the connections made sense, if people were comfortable with the language of the terms that we were using and how the nodes were all connected to one another. And then sort of talked about refining specific areas. And then the last part, for the last workshop, we took the map as a whole, and we used marbles to sort of designate how much change we expected to see in something. So we took, say, starting from this particular node, which could have been soil health. So with a plan change, do we expect a little bit of change or a lot of change? And then from that, what happens all the way down the line in the map, basically. And we tried to make these trends kind of like the trend that we did in the first workshop, basically. So what we sort of discovered, one of the main takeaways, is that there's quite a delay in when you start something, how long it might take to get to the other side of the map or certain areas of the map, which is pretty interesting. And I will bring down the big picture of the map, but this is the whole thing, which is pretty overwhelming when you first look at it. And to even understand it, we could give you a whole other presentation about how to go through it. But essentially it kind of splits into three pieces. So this is the sort of land-based sediments that go into the freshwater kind of side of the map. The middle is the benthic health and structure and recovery from what goes into the coastal environment. And then this looks at the fishing stocks and the fishing sort of outputs, as well as the social impacts of where the benthic health falls into that kind of thing. So from that, so this is now, we're moving on to stage 2, which is the part we've submitted a proposal for. And I'll kind of go over these quickly and then in more detail in a second. But we basically want to look at, now that we have this map, what happens if we tweak certain things, like what we did in workshop 3, basically, when we were just sort of spitballing ideas. But now we want to actually try to apply them in a real situation if we can and see what we find out. So some suggestions are looking at changes in sediment, how much goes into the sea, at what time, and what area, for how long, and what the output is, that kind of stuff. And then we'll use this model, which I'll explain to you in a second. And then from there, we'll take the results from the model and then look back again at the map and see how that influences all the nodes that are connected both ways. So just a real brief overview of the model, because not everyone loves to look at model stuff. Even me as a scientist, it's not my favorite activity. So basically one of the models that was developed in the first phase of Sustainable Seas, the challenge as a whole. Basically, if you look at this diagram on the bottom, if you have a disturbance in the square, then it clears out, new things move in, and then as they grow, then things predate on them and a new structure is formed until it's sort of a mature sort of ecosystem is the ideal. And so this sort of breaks it down where if that's a mature system and then a disturbance happens, what moves in. So these squares represent different functional groups of organisms. And so as it's cleared, these guys move in and the green ones move in. Sorry if people are colorblind and this is difficult to see, but that's essentially the trajectory. And then you kind of end up with this system, which looks quite different to the mature system that you had to start with. So I'll show you one of the videos because it's a little bit overwhelming, but this is essentially what you get out of the model. So if you're looking at a particular area, and that's what the system looks like. It's just kind of ticking along, and then those white boxes are a disturbance of some kind, and then you can see what communities come in when and how long it takes for the community to start to rebuild, which groups come in first and which come in second, and that kind of stuff. And you can do it over certain areas and all kinds of different sort of scenarios, basically.
And just one thing to note there is the colours represent different functional groups. Each of the functional groups has a role to play in how the system operates and builds resilience throughout the system. But also the time step there, you'll see that's 74 years. So we're talking those kind of generational times before things start to come back.
Yeah. Okay, so, and this is just an overview of what we're hoping what we're proposing that the stage 2 for us is going to look like. So first, we'll co-develop some management scenarios with the group. You know, think outside of the box of what we could potentially come up with and test in the model. And then we'll run the model, and then after that, we'll bring the results back to the group and look at the map as a whole and see how basically all the factors that sort of go into the nodes that are changing and come out of them, how they change, how realistic it is. Are people on board with it? Is it completely insane? That kind of sort of conversation. And then the last part I'll let Emma explain because it carries on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So one thing with the systems map that we showed is it came out with these 4 things called goal gaps. And the goal gaps are just the desired state versus the current state. And there were 4 main areas where the goal gaps were shown to be really quite large. One was the freshwater sediments entering, one was the bottom contact, one was loss of connection with Tangoio, and one was the public perception of satisfaction with the health of the marine system. So they're the sort of areas that we're focusing on trying to, and the drivers obviously are that bottom contact and sediments, and hopefully by driving them, we'll actually decrease some of those gaps between the desired and current state in terms of loss of connection and public satisfaction with marine health. But, of course, when you do look at a different management intervention, there will be these inherent social tensions that will obviously come to play. This grey box here is a step that we have said, it's not funded in the second proposal to Sustainable Seas, but we have said to Sustainable Seas, if you're truly, if you really want to see how this works in the real world, you will be needing to fund further information around this, and this is once we've looked at how different management actions might work in that socio-ecological space, how do we navigate the competing multiple values like social tensions? The other part is how do we deal with risk and uncertainty in decision making? And that's a really key one because if you think about the decisions you guys make every day, but you're quite used to it, this is a role you have, but a lot of the time you're basing that on information that is incomplete. And you may have a responsibility or a role on a board of directors of a company, for example, in which you wouldn't make the decision based on the same level of information. So we have this difference between how do you make decisions in the absence of some information to lower the risk of having that uncertainty. So these are the sort of things that we've said to Sustainable Seas. We really need, we can't stop here because this is the really tricky part. How do we push through that? And we're going to need support to go through that as well. So from here, we are hoping the proposal is currently, so the proposal writing team was, the Sustainable Seas lead, which was Carolyn Lundquist from NIWA, Justin Connolly from Deliberate, myself and Becky. We've submitted that to Sustainable Seas. They, I think, will be getting back to us within the next month, but obviously we're hitting December, so we'll be looking to start around January. So it'll be from January to July 22 to run through that process of looking at the scenarios, doing the model runs, coming back, looking to see what that happens. Does it increase or decrease those goal gaps desired to current state? And what do we need to do from there? Now, a key part of this is the research basis. So this is about enabling EBM to be implemented. It's not about implementing EBM. That's where these two lovely ladies and their team go down the back is. We are trying to provide the most information we can and the most support we can to get a good product at the end of it that can be implemented through policy and planning. So the hope is, and that's why Alan Robotham is part of our core team, to get that policy interface in there as well. So, and trying to get that in terms of the Kotahi plan change, how can we improve on what we're doing? No, not waiting for me now either. So our measures of success for this is that we get a better understanding of our multiple and overlapping stresses within the bay. We have a better understanding of how people view it, what those interactions look like, and that at the end of this process we have because our core responsibility is to our Hawke's Bay Marine and Coast team. We're there to make sure that they are heard through the Sustainable Seas process. Because we're part of that team as well, we're there to make sure that the process works for them. And that's it. So any questions?
Any questions? Councillor.
So I've got 2 sets, so I'll go.
Okay.
As you
First
might
set.
expect.
We'll start with first set.
Thanks, Anna. That's useful to get that overview of the that aspect of coastal marine. But I'm left with questions around what actual science outputs you're going to introduce or build on to create this, to be enabling, so we know what's going on. Perhaps if I continue on a little, if you don't mind. I'm seeing, if you like, 2 tranches of work, one being the sediment scenario and the other being disturbance through trawling. I would have thought that was 2 relevant but incomplete sets of data to achieve what you're wanting to do. I'm thinking climate, what are the changes going on with temperature, etc., climate change, and what else is there? The benthos, what's going on there? Is your research looking at building on previous benthos study, and how are you going to populate this so you know what you're talking about?
Great questions. Great questions. So firstly, I'm going to go to this one here. So you're 100% correct in terms of, well, all of it really. These are the sort of layers that we're doing in terms of saying, when you say incomplete data, absolutely. When you go back to that systems map, you'll see things like, here we've got climate change because these interact. Here we've got benthic recovery, there's natural benthic recovery. In that slide where they showed about the disturbance, so where you've got a mature area, you come in, you disturb it, recolonisation. The things that impact on that is you need to have a source. So if you think that model is actually based on a forest gradient model, same model that's used for disturbance in terrestrial systems. So if you think about going in, you've got a native forest, you bowl it. The only way you're going to regenerate a native forest is if there's a source coming into that area. And the things that influence that are how far away you are your source populations. If that area that's disturbed is in the middle of a mature native forest, chances are it's going to be repopulated faster than if it's in the middle of a desert sort of thing. So that's one of them. There are a whole range of things that are going to influence that recovery system. We only chose to focus on 2 of them because that was the only way we were going to be able to eat the elephant. There's so much going on, but these are 2 major stresses that we know affects the habitat quality, the ecosystem quality of the marine system. And they're 2 that are governed by independent or different agencies. So obviously sediment from land is something we manage, and obviously bottom contact is something managed by Fisheries New Zealand. So climate change, 100% in there. Climate change, and this is the great thing about the systems map, which you can't see at the moment, and it does take a lot. We've spent a year sort of coming to terms with this. But all these different arrows are whether there is a directional change. So climate change will change the amounts here as well. How many frequency weather events, that's how much water is going to come off your landscape, that's going to carry sediments, but it also changes recovery rates, it also changes all of these things. So that, the other question was in terms of bringing all the information together. One of the other, the Holy Trinity aside, one of the other reasons we were considered an attractive project team by the Sustainable Seas program is because of our investment into the coastal marine space and the research through the Marine Hotspot, or Marine Environment and Enhancement, Marine Protection and Enhancement Program. I still call them hotspots. And that being able to provide that money for things like surveying, being able to do things like the glider surveys, the river outfall projections, things like that, we're able to actually start to gather that information. And also, it is quite good to use us because we don't have complete information. We're probably like most of New Zealand, we're not a hugely studied area like the Hauraki Gulf. So we're more realistic of what you'd expect throughout New Zealand in terms of managing marine systems.
Can I
That
just-
answer your question? Or
well,
supplementary?
yes, it does, and I probably need to spend a bit more time with you. I mean, my concern on all of this is that we are so far we're so marginal in this gathering together of information that we actually are not enabling anything. I'm looking. For example, we've got potential tools through, say, reserve. What do we know about Te Angiangi that can tell us the effectiveness of reserving? Is that another strategy? It seems to me that we're sort of what's the science outputs from our consenting processes, for example, for the outfalls, to tell us what the benthos is in those environments. Are we pulling that together? And I'm seeing this 300k plus 200 for our own hotspot funding as being completely wasting our time because it's too slow. It's not doing anything that's going to make the difference.
Well, hopefully reassure you that it's definitely not wasting our time, because I honestly believe that this is one of the better opportunities. It's a really good opportunity for us to actually do something that is quite novel and something that may make a difference. Yes, we do collate all that information that was collated in that marine review. So we have GIS layers that have sources from anecdotally going down to Porongahau and talking to the community down there, going around Mahia. We've got them from the outfall benthic studies. So we understand where certain things are and we understand where our gaps are, which was that roadmap that came in. Those layers are all going into that model to help define what will happen when. And hopefully that's the scenarios that we're talking about. What happens if we turn the tap down on sediment in X? What happens if we stop or reduce bottom contact here? And that's not just by saying fishing is out, it's by saying what if you use gear technology that is less likely to cause problems for the benthos? What happens if you put a marine reserve in here? What happens if you seed this area with mussels? So these are all some of the things that may come out of the group discussions in terms of those scenario tests. And then that will give us a better understanding running through the model of whether we're going to achieve that system. You see how long it took to get back to those blues and greens and the matrix of colours, where those functional groups are coming back in from the white where it was disturbing. That's going to help understand what our trajectory through there is. So if we turn down that sediment, it becomes quicker there. But if we do turn down the sediment over here, nothing really changes. Okay, we understand more of our bang for buck about where we need to focus. If we turn down all the sediment, but fishing continues, nothing changes. Right, so what combination and what magnitude do we need to do to sort of start to see some outcomes? Hopefully.
Can I just add too, for something we didn't talk about, just so the presentation wasn't incredibly cumbersome, but part of the systems map report is a knowledge stock take of all the parts of the map of everyone in the group. So it wasn't just the data that comes from HBRC itself, it also is the data that comes from every member of the group and what they know exists that can feed into the model. So it's got more information. It's not just totally us that's supplying all the information.
And one of the inputs into the model is a layer that has every trawl run and how often they're run. So that's the sort of information that we're getting. It's quite spatially resolute in terms of from things like the fishing activities, etc.
Dr. Roger Marker.
Yes, is there any reason why this model and modelling cannot be adapted to fresh bodies of fresh water?
I wouldn't think that there is any reason. I'm just trying to think. It's around succession. So in forests you get this succession when you get a clearance. In marine spaces you do as well. So provided that was the same sort of thing that you were looking at in freshwater, then I can't see why not. Again, it's...
So you said succession?
Yeah, so imagine you've got native forest, you clean it out, you get your primary succession coming back in, which is your manuka, kanuka,
Yes.
then you get your undergrowth, then you get your mature forest coming back. So if you were looking at that same sort of process in freshwater bodies, you possibly could, but it would be reliant on trying to answer that same question.
So Councillor, they do, particularly in freshwater environments, focus on species. So there's a lot of work has happened throughout the world on what they call disturbance ecology for the little creepy crawlies that live under rocks, the bugs. What happens to those when you have floods, droughts, those sorts of things? Sediment, yeah.
Question. Any other questions?
Yeah, new to this, trawling data. So those who use a trawling method have to provide you with that data. It's all GPS.
Again, that's not us. That is the Ministry of Primary Industries, Fisheries NZ. So it used to be Ministry of Fisheries, well, it used to be MAF, used to be Ministry of Fisheries. It then became Ministry of Primary Industries. Now it is Fisheries NZ under Ministry of Primary Industries. That all has to go to them because they undertake stock assessments. So what that means is if you have a stock unit like Snapper, they will get all the information that's coming off the boats. They get, so they have observers that go on some of the boats and they get size, length, and then they look at the stock. So they go, okay, we've got this many in this age class, we've got this many in this age class. Oh, look, we're starting to get lower and lower. We need to change the stock that goes into the quota management system and therefore try and keep the levels of our seafood resources stable. So when they do that, they get all that data from the boats that are commercially collecting finfish. They also get it from recreational by doing boat ramp surveys. So they'll be down the bottom of the boat ramp and they'll say, hey, where did you go? What did you catch? Do you mind if I measure it? Yeah.
My question is more in relation to bottom disturbance. So is that data available where it actually happens while they're actually going through the catch?
So,
and are they certain areas that they are allowed to be in, or is it random?
So the only area that they're not allowed to go in are marine reserves, no-take marine reserves.
So they can just go, because if you're on GPS, they could just almost like a combine harvester, just go right across the whole bay and where they can trawl.
They could. There are some constraints, like for example, you can't go on reefs because you'll wreck your gear. You know, they'll tend to go to fishing grounds that they know are pretty good, and they're based on those functional groups being there, the food sources, the structure that allows them to come in and then go out and feed. So what we know is that things like reefs provide refuge for little fish, so that they like to use that for living and just hiding, and then they go out to feed on the sand flats, that sort of thing. But it will completely depend on the species as well, because you've got bottom feeding species or you've got midwater species. So it's yeah. So they take the GPS coordinates at the start and end of the trawl and they send them into the Ministry of Fisheries. I don't know that it's automatic now. They're looking to be automatic, but I think some of them are still using paper-based copies.
But the data is available?
The data is available. That's why we were able to get spatially explicit lines across the map, and that will tell us both what went over it when and where, but also how many times.
Fantastic question, Councillor Graham, and then Councillor.
No, you have some really serious people in the room with you, and it's kind of like really seems to me like a really good co-design from the very beginning. So, where do you want to end up here? What's your vision of where we're going to end up?
I would love to see, and this is, crystal ball,
Yeah.
I would love to see people focusing on the objectives for the marine environment and then going back to make the policy fit. Not focusing on what I can do within my current policy framework. And I think that's the bit of work. You saw all those different bits of legislation, the different mandate that people have, the different, so that to me is the key thing that I would hope to achieve out of this, is that we look at an objective, we say, you know what, nobody's denying we want more fish in the sea. How do we make that happen without sending some of those small operators out of business? Doing, disconnecting from Tangoio without having those downward effects as well. How do we get the best combination of what we can get?
But isn't the fundamental of that, though, you can't bring about change by doing the same things over and over again. I mean, the point is, I've been in this before, where businesses need to change, but everyone wants to continue to do exactly the same thing. But if everybody does exactly the same things, you can't have change. So we just have to accept, if we want to bring about a different outcome, things have to change. You cannot do the same
100%.
thing. Sorry?
100%.
Well, if we have that as a starting point, then the second question I have the second point I make...
Was that the first one?
No, that was the first point.
The first one was
The first point was that just being... But what the question is here is that we've got all this complicated science and complicated... Is it actually going to get us any further ahead than if we used our heads and said, this is what needs to happen with our current knowledge, and just made a general statement, this is what's going to bring it about?
So this comes right back to that risk and uncertainty in decision making. And the thing is, it's very hard to ask you all to make a decision if we stood here and said, we don't know. For example, as I mentioned, we could turn off all the sediment taps, but if the bottom contact continues, does that give us the outcome that we need? We don't know. So this helps us to kind of understand the interrelated nature of some of these overlapping, multiple, cumulative impacts, to try and tease them out. Cumulative impacts are a massive, they're under the RMA that we have to assess them, but they're hugely difficult to assess. So this is providing us with at least something to help you all, where we come to this decision making, give you a bit more to go on. Does that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we do know. The thing is that having dived the Marlborough Sounds, I was stunned. It was a desert. And if it hadn't been on the surface, people would have been outraged. It was a desert because of the scallop dredges. I have no doubt that it's exactly the same out there as it is in the bottom of the Marlborough Sounds, although I haven't dived it, because of all the bottom dredges. We know it does an effect on the thing, and we pretend it doesn't have an effect because we can't see it, and the fishermen get upset if we tell them you can't go bottom trawl. We're wrecking the seafloor, of that's no doubt. Secondly, we're ruining it because we're putting all the sediment on it. There's no doubt. Third, no doubt, we're overfishing. So we know there's these problems. I don't need a bunch of science really to tell me this is the problem. My point is, I'm trying to say we make a really complicated way to get to somewhere where we could go in one jump and say this is what we need to do to preserve our marine environment.
Councillor, your points are absolutely valid. I guess the issue for this process in this group is that we have jurisdiction over a certain part of the system.
I get that.
And we're dealing with, you will well know, the fishing industry. They're very evidence-based policy.
Yeah, they don't think
absolutely.
like that.
So they won't change,
No.
and change is probably required without the evidence that supports the need for change. So,
like open fires, really.
Things, we've been very purposeful in using that term bottom contact, because there are innovations in fishing. Fishing gear hasn't really changed in 25 years. There are innovations, etc., that some of our Hawke's Bay local fishermen, the small operators, are doing. Rick Birch, who's on the group, and Carl War, who isn't on the group, are changing their practices actually to try and reduce their impacts on the seafloor. So there are ways and means that that can do it, and it's just providing that evidence base.
Thank you, Anna and Becky. One final question is that we will have the kotahi plan that we go through very quickly by 2024. Yep. So how is the information that you gain through this project going to influence by that stage, and at what certainty point are you going to be able to give good data and information to inform the Te Kotahi plan by 2024?
Yeah. So, and that's a really good question, because remembering we are only one player in it, and this is where my grand vision, wish list crystal ball would be that everyone is able. We've got the desire and we've got the willingness to put this into action through Kotahi plan change, or to take the understanding and view it from the decision makers. So again, we provide the information, you guys review the information and make decisions around what you'd like to see in Kotahi around that, the risk and uncertainty. There are other organisations like Fisheries NZ, and it would be great to see that, but obviously they're working to different timeframes. So we only can control what our bits are. Sediment obviously is a big one. We've also got the ability, and which is part of the reason we've been putting the Marine Enhancement and Protection funding towards surveying, is areas of high biodiversity value. We do have, under the Multitude decision, the ability to actually control fishing in those areas, or fishery methods in those areas, So what I'm hoping is that we will have more information on what the relative influence of things like those sediments and where those sediments are coming in. That's that hydrodynamic modelling that's being done at the University of Waikato, to be able to guide the decision makers as to how much, where and when.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd be pleased to move the receipt of the paper with an additional element to the recommendation.
Absolutely.
And that is that in addition to we receiving a note to report, that we ask staff to report to the next EICC meeting its long-term marine and coastal science program and its model to enable the EBM. Do you see what I'm saying there?
I can see you want the strands of research that would potentially support implementation.
Yes.
But so we can totally put that together, and I can do that if you want.
Sure.
As
So I'm asking that
follow-up.
to be reported back to the next.
Absolutely.
Is we're comfortable to add that to the recommendation, Madam Chair?
So the recommendation now is that the EICC receives and notes the report and requests that the staff to report to the next meeting its long-term science program and its model EBM to support implementation.
Happy with that?
Do we have a second?
You second for that?
Yep.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Mark, a second. All those who agree say aye.
Was you going to speak to it, or going to speak to it, or?
I want to speak.
And you can speak to it.
I thought basically it's been carried. It's over. Can't speak to it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Half a minute.
Half a minute.
Good on you.
Look,
Chair, I wish to speak as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Half a minute after.
It's great to see Anna and the team here, and I think that's the point for me, is that this council and our team has the brain power to drive this through in the absence of any other players that are out there looking to do this, and I'm very pleased to see a bit of focus on it. What I think, though, needs to happen is that we can't continue to have the team here with their arm up their back with very little resourcing to actually do what needs to be doing. It's clear and obvious that not only have we got known unknowns, but we've got a huge amount of unknown unknowns going on out there, and it's that evidence that will ultimately drive it. I am, however, in Councillor Barker's camp that let's get on and do something, and I'd really like to see an expansion of the elements you've proposed, so that we can have some more sort of active engagement. For example, we've got a marine reserve that, is in terms of information and knowledge, is lagging behind everywhere else in the country. Why is it that DOC have not provided us with a report card on Te Angiangi. You know, that to me needs addressing at a government level. So it's those sorts of other inputs that we need to know much more. What's coming in from
Councillor
the...
Curtin. That's half a minute. Councillor Graham.
Hang on, I've got 5 minutes. Point of order, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
I support the chair.
We're entitled to 5 minutes, Madam Chair.
Half a minute.
Chair Rule. Yeah, thanks, Anna. I really appreciate the work that both of you have done, actually. We all want to see change. We all know anecdotally that this is not good seen out there. But we do have to do the science because we have a very diverse group and we have different points of view, from the commercial guys to the divers like Rick and Neil, who are seeing it. So we have very diverse things, so we need the science. One of the things, comment I'd like to make is that we really depend on people like you, so because we don't understand the complexities of this. So you made that point about decision making, but a huge part of our decision making is based on the science which you report to us. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Well, I'll wind up, Madam Chair.
Science-led decision making.
It's carried. Thank you.
Hold that thought.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I was very well chaired.
You'll keep, Councillor.
You're having a great day in the chair, yeah?
I know. Thank you. So our next item is Marine Biosecurity Program update.
So, Chair, Alice McNatty and I think is Mark going to join? Yeah, Mark's in the background as well. Mark, you know, acting manager, Catchment Services, and Alice is into a new team leader role, plant peace and marine biosecurity, not marine biodiversity as the paper indicates. Really exciting new area that we're moving into in terms of marine biosecurity, new into our regional pest management plan. Some great work the team are doing in the space. We thought it would be helpful that you got a bit of visibility of that, and Alice will run you through the detail.
Thank you. Well done. Take us away. Could you have the presentation? Sorry. Oh, sorry. I won't be able to speak to this. Smells very...
Is the keyboard turned on, Annalise?
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
And do I just use this to go forward?
All the
and
arrows,
it's
all
green.
the mouse scrolling up and down.
Thank you.
So, hi, so I'll just give you a brief overview of the Marine Biosecurity Program. So marine pests can have a significant negative impact on the ecosystems that they invade by competing with native species or directly preying on them and disrupting ecosystem processes. Marine pests have established at many ports throughout New Zealand and harbours. However, Hawke's Bay is lucky in that we're not known to have any of the worst of these marine pests established here. And the main vector pathway for marine pests to move around New Zealand, or in fact into New Zealand, is on the bottom of vessel hulls. Down the bottom here I just have a picture of a vessel that came into Hawke's Bay in 2013. Sorry, yes, 13. And this vessel came into Hawke's Bay. It stayed here for a couple of months and then it went up to Northland. The Northland Regional Council Marine Biosecurity team dove this vessel, viewed it, and unfortunately they found mature Mediterranean fanworm, which is a marine pest, on the hull of this vessel. So those fanworm would have been here when this vessel was berthed in Hawke's Bay. So this was the catalyst for us to carry out our first dive survey of in a harbour to assess if Mediterranean fanworm have established here. Thankfully we haven't found any to date. So as a response to the risks of marine pests, the potential of them to be brought into Hawke's Bay from other areas, the Regional Pest Management Plan, which was reviewed last year, came into play in February 2019. Marine biosecurity was added to this. Two marine pests, Mediterranean fanworm and club tunicate, were declared as exclusion pests for our area. That's because these are the pests that are most likely spread on vessel hulls, and they're also distributed
quite widely throughout New Zealand. We've also got a clean hull rule in the plan, which states that an operator of a vessel entering the waters of Hawke's Bay must ensure that the hull or any structure has no more than a slime layer and or goose barnacles. And that's because that marine pests can hide within other hull fouling. So having that level of cleanliness will help to ensure that marine pests aren't brought here on the hulls of vessels. And down the bottom we have club tunicate on the left, and then both the other two pictures are of Mediterranean fanworm. And this middle picture shows the density that Mediterranean fanworm can get to once they're established in an area. So just a quick overview of our program as it stands now. So we carry out hull inspections of vessels when we deem them to be at high risk of carrying marine pests, and I'll go into a bit further detail on that. We also carry out biennial surveys of the Ahureria in a harbour to see if marine pests have been brought here. And that's because, so we do these surveys because the quicker we can catch a marine pest when it comes in, the better chance we have of eradicating it. Being the marine environment, it is very difficult to eradicate once they've established. We also form and maintain partnerships with the likes of Napier City Council and the Napier Sailing Club. They own all the berths in a harbour. And we also work with many councils north of ours. We're part of the partnership called the Top of the North Marine Biosecurity Partnership. So we work to share information and create best practice. And we also undertake advocacy and awareness programs, both in our region, and we participate nationally with the Top of the North Marine Biosecurity Partnership to spread the word of marine biosecurity and the risks that marine pests can pose. So when a vessel comes into the inner harbour, they are required to fill out an incoming vessel form, and this has specific biosecurity questions on it. We then receive this form, and a risk analysis is undertaken of this information to assess the risk of the vessel potentially carrying marine pests. And any vessels that are deemed high risk, we get divers in to look at the hulls. Any non-compliant vessels, with their rules and the plan, we can direct them to be hauled out and cleaned, or in one case, we directed a vessel to leave Hawke's Bay waters. So we've received 133 vessel forms to date, and of these, 24 vessels have been inspected. Only 8 of these vessels were compliant with the clean hull rule, and a further 16 were not compliant. Of these non-compliant vessels, 14 of these were directed to be hauled out, and one of them, as I've said, was directed to leave Hawke's Bay waters. And unfortunately, 2 of these vessels carried marine pests, which is of great concern. So these pictures just give you an idea of some of the hull fouling we've come up against. This vessel actually came into Hawke's Bay before the Regional Pest Management Plan rules were put in place for marine biosecurity, but we had word that this vessel was very fouled, so we got it hauled out. But you can see the fouling on the keel, and that's a picture of under the hull, and there's lots of room for potentially for marine pests to be attached and even hiding in there. Thankfully, no marine pests were found, and this vessel was cleaned before being put back in the water. So this is just another example of a vessel coming in. This is actually one of the ones that had a marine pest on it. So this yacht came into Napier. I received the incoming vessel form, and straight away I could see there was quite a lot of information missing, and the vessel had also come from Auckland, which is a hotspot for marine pests. The skipper had also recently purchased this vessel and couldn't give me a lot of information about its anti-fouling and cleaning history. So I got the divers in to have a look under the vessel, and unfortunately 2 mature Mediterranean fanworm were found on the vessel. So Mediterranean fanworm are difficult to treat in that if they get disturbed, they can either drop off into the water column, and then they could be very difficult to find, or they can spawn. So the divers had to go in and put bags around the fanworm before very carefully detaching them and then bringing them to the surface. So that's just them on the surface. But as I mentioned, the fan worm can also detach when they're disturbed. So before the vessel was hauled out, we had to manufacture a wrapping for the vessel, and this is in case the divers missed any immature fan worm that would be difficult for the divers to see. So when the vessel was hauled out, hopefully, if any were still there, if they did detach, they'd fall into this wrapping. So then this vessel was hauled out and very thoroughly cleaned. Then the COVID lockdown occurred, so this vessel actually stayed on the hard stand for about 4 months, which would definitely ensure that any marine pests were killed.
Clever tactic.
Yes. So where to from here? We're going to continue with our advocacy and awareness programs, and definitely the vessel inspections, which have shown to be very valuable, and continue to work with our partners such as the Top of the North Marine Biosecurity Partnership to further develop our risk analysis and a marine vessel database. And this vessel database would show if another council has inspected a vessel and what they found, and we'll continue with the surveys of the inner harbour. So what do we need? What we really need is behaviour change from the boating community. We need skippers to accept that they need to have a clean boat when they move around. And we're also advocating for Biosecurity New Zealand, which is the Ministry of Primary Industries, to carry out further surveillance for marine pests at the Napier port. The last one survey wasn't carried out there since 2003, so we feel it's overdue for another round of surveillance. And this is a national problem and it needs a national solution. The problem of marine pest spreading occurs when vessels move around New Zealand. And currently it's up to the different councils to have rules regarding hull fouling, and some councils have no rules. So what we'd really like and are advocating for is a national pathway management plan with one set of rules for New Zealand, and also a nationally used vessel register to track vessels. So I just thought I'd finish with this slide. So this shows the waters that Hawke's Bay Regional Council manages. We are lucky in that our coastline is exposed, in that we have relatively few places to safely anchor overnight. So this gives us a real opportunity to assess and I suppose watch for the vessels that come into Hawke's Bay, and if any of them are shown to be high risks of carrying marine pests, then to get in and have a look and fulfil our rules. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Alice. Councillor Barker.
2 questions. Firstly, who pays for the cost of doing all the netting and the diving? Does the boat owner have to pay for that?
So when we get divers in the water and they look under the vessel, we cover that cost. For the haul out or any treatment, then that goes back to the vessel owner.
Second thing about vessels mooring around the coast here, parking, do you have a relationship with the Customs Service who has a watch group looking for boats around there to see if there's any unidentified boats in the area? Because if you don't, I think you should have.
So in terms, obviously we've got a close relationship with the harbour master, and also there have been some vessels actually in the inner harbour but not moored on the legal moorings.
No, the harbour master is ours.
Yes.
I'm talking about the New Zealand Customs Service.
Yes.
As an organised group who watch around most of the New Zealand coast and have people who associate with that. Now, do we have a relationship with them to see if there are vessels come in who moor, for example, on mahi or something like that we don't know about, but they might know about, for us to then have a check? It seems to me there would be a sensible relationship to have.
So that is a relationship that we need to grow, definitely.
Yeah, I would go and deal with it, because they would have it, they've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Councillor Foss.
Good morning. Just the locally based fishing companies and vessels and recreational vessels, particularly many of those fishing vessels would come and go outside this particular area. Are you confident that they're following the risks around then? best practice or whatever it might be,
So
where we're walking our own Hawke's Bay talk?
Yes, so in terms of the commercial fishing vessels, I'm currently working with them to definitely make those rules clear to them. I've had the interactions I've had with them so far are very positive. And we do get communications out to the recreational vessel owners, but they are, it is important that they understand when they leave and when they come back that they do need to be clean if they're going outside Hawke's Bay waters.
I understand that it's important that they understand that, but it's similar to Councillor Barker's, the customs kind of interrelationship question there. Is there a relationship? Sounds like that relationship could be more intense, or
we are continually trying to expand that. Yes.
Yep. So there's no barriers other than everyone just getting around the table and improving the relationship.
Yes.
Councillor Graham.
It seems to me that this is a real battle that it's very difficult to win, and it's quite extraordinary you don't already have it, because the ships are coming from Auckland all the time. So are you going to, is it winnable? You can't look under every hull that comes in?
No. So, yes, we are very lucky that we don't have any known marine pests established here. We can't look under every hull, but there's a whole booklet of marine pests, really, and that list is always growing. So even if we get one here or two here, I don't think we've completely lost the battle, because each marine pest has, can have their own significant effects. I think creating greater awareness nationally, and that's also the difficulty with this program, is that we're definitely concerned about the vessels based here going out and coming back in, but all the other vessels coming from around New Zealand, that to me it really needs a bit more of a national approach and national coordination and a national set of rules, because it's very hard for us to communicate out to kind of everywhere outside of Hawke's Bay.
Sorry, Rex, I can also add on that. So we're trying to hold the fort right now. So MPI, or Biosecurity New Zealand, are now finally looking at producing a strategy, a national strategy, and the other councils, so Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, they're forming an inter-regional pest management strategy whereby they're going to require hulls to all be cleaned, and that's the main source. So what we're trying to do is just hold the line.
Cleaned periodically, or like in every 3 months, or what do they mean by that?
So they've got a rule where we have, it's no more than a slime layer. So ideally, I think it's every 6 months they have to be hauled out and cleaned.
So that'll be
but obviously that's not happening right now. And where we want to be is like a warrant of fitness for the car. So people have to haul them out and clean them. So what we're doing is trying to hold the line, because we've got an opportunity to do that, in the hope that the rest of the country catches up.
Any other questions?
Is that quite costly, that hauling out and cleaning? Is that why boat owners aren't doing it?
I suppose it depends what you call costly. For a regular sized vessel, it might be up to $500. I personally don't know what that costs. I just needs to be in the costs of the vessel, I suppose.
And again, I think it's under the vessel, so they just don't think about it as much as they should. It's like people should check their tyres. We don't always do that.
But dirty hull makes it run through the water slower, cost you more fuel. But the cost on the other side is that we've got pests here, like we've got Untitled in New Zealand, which is a real problem. Well, that's a cost to us.
Yes.
Might not have been a cost to the person much to clean the vessel, but the cost to us is significant.
If there's no more questions, Deputy, would you like to move? Can we have a seconder, please? Would you like to speak in half a minute?
I forgo my 30 seconds, thank you.
All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carry. Thank you.
A very long 30 seconds, you know. It wasn't 30 seconds at all.
Trying to be fair, but we've got a timeline to get
I'm
to.
helping the chair.
Okay, our next item is the Biosecurity Operational Plan and Annual Report. Thank you, Mark.
So Chair, perhaps just obviously Mark's been in front of you before, so you know Mark's role with us. Just further context to the paper, as it sets out the production of an operational plan and operational report is something that we're required to do and have been doing for many, many years. That what isn't actually a requirement in doing those plans, is for us to bring those plans to council, which is kind of unusual. And under the previous Environment and Services Committee, we had clear writing instructions that those reports weren't required to be brought to that committee. We're testing the water. We're proposing that we would like to bring these papers to you on a regular basis every year for your awareness and understanding, so that you're able to better communicate outside the organisation on the work that we are doing, why we are doing it, how we're doing it, and what we're achieving. Stress that it is very, very operational, so it is really translating our regional pest management strategy into action. So how do we achieve the things the strategy and plans anticipate, and the work that we are doing. What it will also do is give you awareness of emerging issues as we see them, and it's not that we'll only provide them in the annual plan, but the annual plan is obviously a place, or annual report is a place where you'll have absolute clarity across the whole biosecurity network and system of what's going on. And then lastly is, and selfishly I guess for staff, is that in growing that awareness you will have a much greater appreciation for the work and an understanding of the issues as we bring to you changes required to our resourcing to support our activities in this space. And obviously one that we're not going to go into a lot of detail on today, but will be coming to you shortly, is the further review of our possum control activities. So with that said, I'll hand over to Mark, and he's going to quickly run you through the details.
Thanks, Ian. So kia ora koutou. This paper is accompanied by two reports. It's the Biosecurity Annual Report, which is from last financial year, and the operational plan for this financial year. So instead of doing death by PowerPoint, we decided just to talk to a couple of key items, and then we can go straight to questions. So as stated in the paper, regional councils have a mandate under Part 2 of the Biosecurity Act to provide regional leadership in pest management. This is achieved through the Hawke's Bay Regional Pest Management Plan, which is this document here. Alice referred to it just before, and it was amended in 2018. It contains 33 pest plants, 23 pest animals, 2 marine pests, and 5 horticultural pests. So the annual report, you'll see it outlines the work the biosecurity team delivered last financial year. And I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge a couple of the key items that they've achieved throughout the year. So hopefully you notice that the pest plant team engaged with 2,334 properties in regards to pest plant management. Now when you think about council staff interactions with the community, that's pretty significant. It's a lot of properties to visit. As Alice outlined before, we had the marine pest program. That's a new program that's been established, and it's already having good results with detecting that Mediterranean fanworm on a boat that would have been a resident to the bay and likely established. So that was a great win for Alice. The pest animal team has delivered a range of programs, including the possum monitoring program, where they monitored across 80,000 hectares. They've also worked with approximately 32 community groups and land occupiers in managing predominantly predators. And some of those actually presented to this committee not long ago in that partnership we have with them. They've also controlled, Rex, you'll be happy with this hopefully, 1,267 feral goats last year. So making a dent in the feral goats up in Mahia and around the Mangahururu area, which is a positive. So finally, the predator-free Hawke's Bay team, they worked across 54,000 hectares, and you'll see from the paper they've removed a large number of predators from that landscape. The personal highlights for me, to be honest, are no exclusion pests establishing in Hawke's Bay. I think that's a real win. We don't want those. And the second part being the team worked really hard this year, even through lockdown, which was during a very busy period for them, and they've managed to achieve almost all the programs, even with that lockdown. However, there are some areas of concern that we need to be flagged. So 18% of properties failed their possum monitor this year. We have the ongoing issue of rabbits and how to manage those effectively. And the pressure is continuing to grow for the pest plant team as we do discover more and more properties with Chilean needlegrass. It's a very difficult weed to manage. So those are some of the key areas that we need to look at how we better resource or manage moving forward. So moving forward, as Ian touched on, we have put a proposal in for the long-term plan. That's predominantly around increasing the possum monitoring program so we can cover a wider area. We also have reprioritised resources internally to assist with the pest plant team, particularly during that really busy summer season. And as stated in the paper, we are working through the Section 70A review, including the review of the PCA program, which is underway right now. And as we will bring those forward to you in due course.
Chair, perhaps just one other final comment in your commentary on the paper. It would be really helpful to hear from you whether you'd like us to carry on bringing these reports back to this committee every year.
Great questions. Councillor Barker.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to see these reports regularly. I just would make a note, if I'm able to. It's very pleasing to see the bird numbers increasing in the Cape City. Some really good positive things here. My question is, can we help empower individual people to join the campaign against pests? And I say this because here I'm on the regional council, and I wasn't really quite sure what Chilean needlegrass was. And it took someone to explain it to me. And I didn't know if I was confronted with Chilean needlegrass, how to deal to it. So the thought occurred to me, why don't we, because everybody goes on to Google, you see a thing Google says and looks up YouTube clips of what to do with it. Why doesn't the regional council have a Fred Talks session where one of our staff members comes there and says, well, this is Chilean needlegrass, this is how you differ from such and such, explain it to people so they can see, and this is how you deal with Chilean needlegrass. A simple thing, like set on fire, whatever the process is, I don't know, but to deal with it, and to go through all of those main pests, because a number of them there, for the average person, the name is just sort of incredible. We've got sort of really obscure names for things, and people themselves wouldn't know what it was. So given that the pathway now for people to learn and act is via Google, via YouTube clips, why don't we do, and I just thought Fred Talks is a play on TED Talks, but it's a very sort of, low-key, bit of, colloquial, farm, country type humour, and encourage people to do things. I'm sure if we give them the knowledge and the tools, they will do it. So could we become more proactive and more active in that area?
That's a fantastic idea, Councillor Barker, because we do have a Pest Hub website on HBRC, but the next level to be added is how we deal with it and how that can be explained through the example you gave. So is that doable?
The team has already done some of that, but absolutely I like it, and we can definitely build on that.
Fred Talks, and everyone is, someone comes along and says, this is what it is. Chilean needlegrass, I heard about it. This is what it looks like. Differs from here. This. Now, how do you fix it? And we deal with this way to it. And every pest we have a list there so people can see and encourage people how to do things, and also talk about the risk of, for example, hedgehogs. That these aren't warming for each other things. These are, in actual fact, serious pests, and how to deal with hedgehogs, and to get get things. So we engage people in dealing with these predators and pests in a way which we haven't done before.
Take control and be biosecurity advocates.
They'll join the team if we help them.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Fred.
Other questions?
That's a good question.
Councillor Foss.
Thanks. Ian, thanks for that setting the context earlier, because there are quite a few moving bits in this space, particularly that Section 17. So a few things. First, that question you posed, would we like to see this or a summation more of this at this committee? Yes, very much so. Obviously, these issues have been quite prevalent, or some of these issues, for quite a few of us for a while. And so if we have those high-level progress indicators, dashboards, whatever it might be, at a glance, so we can have a look at a measure as good as it could be, and progress, more importantly, and then some eye on some destination. That would be really good. Just a couple of questions, but actually I do think you answered, but one of your highlights there is on page 26 in the annual, of our report, 10.11, did you controlled over 54,000 hectares removing 92 feral cats, 37 ferrets, some stoats, 706 hedgehogs, and 945 rats. Fantastic, but I just can't interpret that either. You're doing incredibly well, because those numbers over 54,000 hectares are very small, actually, or we're missing a whole lot. So, or was this just what your team did? I think it's what you said in your introduction.
Yeah, so that's just the trapping records from the Cape City, Potere and the Mahia predator-free area. So it's just records of what they've called in traps.
Of that team, right, okay, so that explains the discrepancy between those numbers. So how many traps have we as a council funded or put out there in the last 10 years or
I'd
so?
have to go back and ask the team that.
Is it thousands, or is it?
It would be thousands.
Yeah,
Yes.
thousands.
Yes.
And do we know how many of those are live? You know, are being maintained, they're in lines at the moment? It's like 80% and 20% have been refurbished or something like that?
Yeah, so it's all live on trap.nz, and they go around and surface those, I believe, quarterly.
Yep.
And I would have to go back and ask the team exactly the number of traps in that area.
And so if we know that, therefore we know where they are, and therefore, you know, everyone acknowledged that the possible control system we had worked really, really well. Lost a bit of focus on the way, and now we're getting it all back. It's all good news. But are you also able to, because some of these neighbours' numbers, we look at the 4% threshold, etc. But there are hot spots which far exceed this.
Yes.
And so, as I'm not asked to put you on the spot, but if that can be reported up, or we can see progress to some of those hot spots, and then our confidence as these other reports come through with TB3 and Osprey,
Yeah, for sure.
that
Yeah, we can do
iteration,
that.
just so we see the hot spots.
In the particular areas.
Wherever they might be. They may be quite small, but that's what throws the numbers out, and that's what gets everyone's attention. Suddenly we see all possums where we didn't.
So is that like a map view, councillor?
Yeah.
Well, just a bit of information. Yeah. You talked about the Tikakino properties, I think recently in one of the other reports, properties or something like that.
Yep, that was recent monitoring data coming in.
Yeah.
So, yep.
But also the narrative there is, you know, and I think it's in this report too, that they 18% dropped the ball or etc. But our own engagement with them wasn't probably what we'd like it to be as well. So the prompt and the pushes and all those things. So that's all fine though. Just finally, the data that everything rests on, the properties that you've put traps in and we're going to have a look at or monitor and check the lines and all that, is that now been updated, or is it, because it was quite a way out of date last I heard?
So yeah, we are still trying to work internally with the ICT team to get a better system. We were hoping to work through Iris and others, but that hasn't happened yet. So we're still currently in a position where we're using our current data collection methods, so that's Excel and BioVault. The main issue we have is actually keeping land contact details up to date. That's the biggest issue we have. Properties continually change. However, our data is all there, it's all accurate. It's just not as user-friendly as we would like it. So we definitely need to do more work there. It's just a matter of finding a system that accurately works.
Well, that's great. So your actual data is good. It's just the systems are a bit ropey.
Absolutely.
And we're bringing back in the long-term plan workshops some proposals to further fund those systems to help the team who are still unfortunately using slates and abacuses to do a lot of work to get them more into the digital era.
Yeah, okay, fine. And then finally, you put in applications a long-term plan for additional funding in this space with reference to our general thrust of user pays anywhere and everywhere, particularly for pest and possum control. But just as you report this back up, money is not actually the issue here, or it's not the core issue, is everyone losing a bit of focus in this space over the last few years. It's the way it's executed and the systems and engagement. And so are you able to kind of explain, or or just give us that kind of reassurance that there are changes, and I know you're still waiting for Section 17, to address some of those core issues, core problems, so we can merrily go on and vote extra funding to achieve a better outcome?
And so, Mark, I'm sure we'll add to this, but yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor, that what we're interested in is changing the system and the management rather than necessarily focusing purely on the dollars. Obviously, there's a cost implication to any change we make, and we'll give you visibility of that. But what we're going to bring back to you, particularly in the possum space, is the system and the management approach we think is the best and de-risks possum number increases best for the region. There'll obviously be a change to the way we're currently operating that will, they'll have some who like it and some who won't, so it will become contested at some point, and there'll be a cost implication for changing the way we operate. And we'll bring you all of that, but our focus is absolutely on what are the risks, how do you effectively manage those risks, what are the right structural systems that provide the least risk to managing those, and what are the options around that, and we'll present all of that to you so you can balance risk alongside costs and other things that will naturally appear beside that.
And so just finally, if we go for predator-free, say for example Mahia, but eventually across Hawke's Bay, why are we satisfied with a 4% target or cap for possum? Why isn't there a sinking lid on that? Because that doesn't, 4%, 3 is still under 4, but it's still not predator-free. So is everything aligned up there? Or
yeah, and so with the regional pest management plan, that is the plan. So it went from 5%, 4%, and then we're going to continue down to reduce the RTC. We don't know if that's the right approach though. So as Ian mentioned, we could have come to this long-term plan and put up just a bit for X dollars, but we need to really rethink our programs to make sure they're fit for purpose first. That's going to take some time, so we're not going to meet that LTP deadline. So we're going to rework these over the next year or so and make sure they're well thought through, well planned, and like you say, aligned to all the other objectives we have, and then bring those to you.
And sorry, just for absolute clarity, the predator-free program like Whakatipu Mahia is intending to have 0 possum numbers, for example, but in our broader possum control area, outside of that, there is an acceptance that there will be some residual numbers of possums, but managed at very low levels. The predator-free programs, which are geographically isolated, the plan is to get rid of all pests, including possums.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, and we've got a few follow-up items there for next meeting to cover off those questions you asked. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. Pest subsidy schemes, you report on them, but is there a trend at all?
For pest plants, absolutely, it's increasing.
Okay, so public is aware of it and are making use of it. Okay. Yes. And are there areas where we maybe actually could bolster it somewhat? So, including hotspots, that we could get the communication out that this is actually available?
Absolutely, and that's again going to be part of that review, re-looking at how that subsidy scheme works. Is it fit for purpose, and can we better utilise it? Yep.
I'll move, Chair.
I'll second.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I do. Thanks, Mark, for all the work you do here. It's great, and for you, Ian, I enjoyed reading this report, and I think even though you probably don't have to give it, it's really good that we do get it. And I really do endorse Rick's thoughts on how do we communicate to the public about things like hedgehogs, because every time I bash one over the head, my daughter goes berserk, and I have to explain that they're pests, but people don't understand hedgehogs are pests, and we've still got some farmers in Wairua who think goats are great. Feral goats are great because they round them up and pay the school fees or take a trip to somewhere, I don't know. But we've got to have the public understand that these things are pests. And then lastly, cats, feral cats. We all know they probably do the most damage in our environment of anything. But there's a lot of people still think they're lovely and cuddly. So, we need to have that TED Talk thing, or Fred Talk, was it?
Fred Talks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Could you start the process of telling people actually cats aren't as good as you think they are, and it's going to take a while.
I would endorse that. I think the report should come here regularly. It highlights the pluses and it highlights the minuses. Really encouraging to read for fact the bird numbers are increasing. People in Hastings quite often comment to me about the number of tui and other birds around in Hastings and how delightful it is. But this is a consequence of a steady campaign of dealing to the predators. And when we had the report about the bird numbers on the braided rivers here, where Hawke's Bay was holding its numbers, whereas the rest of the country was going back, that's again a function of reducing predators. Now, we have done reasonably well, but I think we can do much better by engaging the whole of our community on doing this, because you can see a driven benefit. Everybody wants to hear tui and see fantail in the trees around them. It will only ever achieve that if we get these predators down, and we need to have a means of getting engaging our community so they become part of the team which goes and does this. So great report, good start, really enthusiastic about it continuing.
Thank you. Absolutely agree. So all those who agree with receiving the report, say aye.
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 Those against, carried. Thank you. 2 more items, team, before you get a cup of tea.
What?
Don't even respond, Madam Chair, just carry on.
Item 10, we've got the Heretaunga Plains Flood Control Scheme Review Update. Kia ora. So, who is presenting?
Yes, I'll just introduce
Thank
the
you.
team. So, here's David. Here's David Karakia. He's leading the project, the Heretaunga Level of Service project. So I've got a bit of a basic presentation here, and some of the team available to answer any tricky questions you may have. One of the big issues for us with the IRG funding that we're about to sign up to is a massive acceleration of this project, essentially taking it from a 10-year delivery time frame to a 3-year delivery time frame. So the team have been very busy through various aspects of the project. So with that, I'll just hand over to...
Keep talking for a minute. For some reason that.
No. Presentation, putting morning tea out another minute.
Absolutely. And just to recap, it is our intention to bring
Between us and Smogo.
Sorry.
So it is our intention to bring an update to each committee meeting throughout the year. So we'll be getting additional updates as we proceed. So I'll hand over to David.
Thank you, Chris. Kia ora koutou. So we'll just take you through a whistle-stop tour of the update for the level of service review. Mindful that we've got a second presentation after this before morning tea. So overview of the scheme extents here on the right-hand side. And our programme snapshot. So we're sitting in here just now after a considerable amount of modelling work that's been done on both the Tūtira and the Narororo. We had the fortunate interruption of the IRG funding that changed the course of our focus to identify 2 key sites on the Tūtira to progress with the IRG funding in the first year. And that's allowed us to approach a geotechnical consultant to assist us with identification of suitable sites and geophysical testing, destructive and non-destructive testing. Next step. So we may have covered this in a previous discussion, but it's worth just providing a bit of an update around our land ownership, land tenure and land use within our GIS system. And that gives us a real good clarity on borrow sites, easements, strategic land purchase, and this colour-coded map gives us a bit of an indication as to where the high-risk areas are and where some of the low-risk areas are for that.
On to me.
Maybe just pass to Craig here.
So this is just a snapshot of the hydraulic modelling to show that the 3,000 cubic flow, which is now labelled as the 0.2% AEP, more commonly known as 500 year, actually is contained within the banks there. One of the things that we have talked about is climate change and how that may be affected in the river schemes. There's considerable, I guess, variations in climate change predictions. Now you most often hear climate change predictions as in raising temperature, which then increases the amount of moisture that can hold in the air, which therefore increases the rainfall. But there's very little research on what that really means in the river, how much flow is coming down. Now, what we think is an appropriate approach is to say in the next 20 years, all the predictions are around about the same, So let's have a hold point in 2040 and not spend too much money right now thinking that we're going to be on the top path, because that may result in a big increase in flow, but it may not. So like, don't build stuff too big right now if you don't really need to. That variation is pretty big. So yeah, we think it's just an appropriate way to do it. So we did want to have a little bit of feedback from you if you think that's an okay thing to do. We can discuss that at the end as we come through.
Like that.
Yep. One of the things that we've been doing on this is the consequence of failure. This doesn't say anything about the condition of the stop bank. This is just if it were to fail, what's going to happen. So there's areas which are less risky than others because the flow might just go out and come back in because it's a short reach, or it may, like on the Motio bank, once it gets out there, it goes completely different, down Narroro, or something like Taradale, the bank there. If that were to fail, that's catastrophic for a huge amount of the housing stock there.
Really?
Then as you get further down, it's different levels of risk there.
So can we ask questions of going through?
Is that okay?
It's up to you. Yeah,
Yep,
sure.
sure.
Yeah.
So I agree that there's areas of the bank that are going to have to be really good. Are we doing extra work on those areas, are we?
We'll come to that. We'll answer that.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll leave the questions to the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The answer's in the report.
I was going to say something.
Good question. I like it.
So
Yeah.
look, there's two parts to that. So one is the good news story is the modelling has shown that the height of the existing banks will contain a standard 1 in 500 year event. So
Okay.
that's actually quite promising. What it means is we don't, like last time we presented opportunities to give the river room, etc. So it means that in all likelihood we won't be shifting stop banks around or doing major work to increase the height. So the project is very much focusing on what's up on here, which is the resilience. And so it's looking at how resilient is different sections of stop bank to prolonged flood events, and what's the consequence of failure. So that's the area that the team is focusing on, particularly for the early years of the IRG funding work, which is all about creating jobs, doing projects in the community, and these are a couple of projects that we can launch into quite quickly.
Thanks for that, Chris. Just to sort of echo what Craig had picked up on there in some of the earlier slides. So essentially our risk of overtopping has been minimised by the work that's been done with the modelling. However, that doesn't include the climate change effects. So what we were touching upon there with the RCPs and that variance between 5% and 39%, that's a huge range to be catering for that could have significant implications on flow rate for the rivers. So notwithstanding this risk that's been more or less mitigated, we've now got these other 5 risks to address, and that's how we're going to progress with the 2 identified sites on the Tūtira.
Just going along on the same point there, when you're looking at risks of failure, overtopping, say at the top there, if you had a low stop bank, then overtopping was the biggest risk, but as soon as you remove that risk, you put one of the other ones as the critical failure point, which could be, it is just a schematic of could be any of those, depending on what the state of the banks are. This is actually an important thing for us in terms of climate change too. If you think about the way our stop banks are built, they're just a massive earth and grass cover. The grass cover is actually very important because that prevents that first level of erosion. And when, if you say at the top, this is velocity of the water that's coming down the river. If you have concrete, if you decided to concrete the whole thing, great, you can have 8 meters per second for as long as you want. But we don't. We have grass cover. That good grass cover will maybe last about 50 hours. But if it's poor, it might only last 3 hours. So the risk changes during a flood event. So normally we sort of say our banks will last for, say, 3 days, but then they become saturated, and then the erosion starts to take place, and the risk goes up significantly. So if we can reduce that risk, that's a better option than just building them higher. So that's what where we're coming to with this. This is actually when we talked about the flood frequency of this is the Tūtira at Puhitapu. The orange dots are the actual flood events, and then the green line is the best fit curve that we can find for that. Statistically speaking, there's a lot of maths involved in that. But what do you think about with these things? The really big events are usually they're so infrequent, but the events sort of in this area are the ones that are frequent enough, 50-year events, 20-year events, that cause a lot of damage.
Excuse me.
And those are the ones that we should protect against. You find you get more benefit protecting against those ones than worrying about the one that might happen every 500 years or so.
Can we do both?
We'll come to that.
Yeah.
We're going to come to that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Actually, to answer that quickly, to do both there's always a risk. With any engineering thing, you don't just build for complete protection. It's like, what risk are you willing to pay for or not pay for?
Yeah.
So that's the.
So with regards to the IRG funding, the funding has been confirmed by Crown. We're looking to take on a couple more FTEs to help deliver this significant portion of works over the 3-year period. The 2 sites we've identified we'll just touch upon now in a little bit more detail. And these are Tūtira State Highway 50 to Redcliffe, and the extent of the stop bank shown in purple here. I think this might be shown as an attachment to the paper. We've got the flood risk area mapped out here as well, and that shows the significance of consequence of failure of this reach. The next site we touched upon earlier was the Moteo stop bank area, and that's shown here, the Moteo stop bank, and the consequence of failure shown as flood risk mapping for that specific site.
I'll do this if you want. So here's one of the options. This is just an option that we're thinking about, that we could say existing stop bank in the solid line there. The slopes of those are 2-to-1 slopes, so they're actually fairly steep. And the top width is 4 meters. So one thing that you can do is lessen the slopes. And actually the international standard that is bandied about these days is more like a 3-to-1 slope. And it's just because 2-to-1 is you just have a higher chance of erosion, so you just put more material there. That's all you do. And then we thought, okay, if you build it, say, double the top width, therefore you've also made a spot where you can say, if in the future you do want to raise it, it's easy to raise because you've got 8 meters of width there, and you can go up to 4 meters if you want to. So one of those things of helping it future-proof it, and with a relatively moderate cost too. It's just earthworks. It's not a major thing there. What was the next thing?
So I guess what Craig's sort of aiming at there was with the proposed additional extension to the stop bank, that helps to mitigate that risk of the scour, the seepage, the piping, and the erosion that was shown on the previous slide, where we've ticked the box for the overtopping failure. This will help us deal to some of those more onerous.
I'll just flip back to something too that's important to. When we talk about flood frequency, we always think about the peak flow, but we never mention the duration. So remember, Cyclone Bola was 3 days long.
Yep.
And an equivalent flood in the Esk in 2018 was only about 6 hours long.
Yep.
Now the damage is hugely different. So you could have a lower flood event with a longer duration that will really significantly affect the flood banks. That's the grass cover. So say something that's 3 or 4 days long, all of a sudden is like a big problem for us. So reinforcing that stuff is I think key to keeping that the risk down as within practical terms. Yeah.
Just to close, the forward works programme for this portion of works is going to include an external consultant to do an overall assessment of the Heretaunga Plains flood control scheme, and give us some other options around potential solutions outside of stop bank upgrades. Developing a risk register for flood for flood effects of the stop bank upgrades. Physical works, investigations, design works and improvements, and then each site will be prioritised based on the risk and also the consequence of failure. And so that sort of follows the same path as we've arrived at these two particular sites that have been identified.
I think that was it.
Great. Questions? Councillor Barker.
My experience in stop banks comes from being with the Catchment board on the west coast of the 1960s, so it's quite a different environment, quite a different thing. So, and we used to talk then about hydraulic pumping rather than piping, so all the terminology is moved. But one of the things that happened there under flood, on a couple of occasions, couldn't get to rescue the stop bank because the top of it was too narrow and it was too risky to put a truck on the rock and so on. So would, by those two stop banks that you're increasing there, having a bigger, broader stop bank, mean that you had a stronger stop bank that in the event of a potential failure, you could move machinery on to go and store it up or so on? Or would you have another technique of how to protect it by the different ways of protecting it?
Yeah, that top width is really good. Here is one of the Narroro banks that eroded in Cyclone Bola, and it's like, we're lucky we had that extra width there.
Yeah.
And if you had 8 meters instead of 4 meters, wow, that'd be great. So yeah, absolutely, and that would help immensely to do something like that. It's just, and when they built them at the time in the 80s, they rebuilt these in the like 89 to 92. They accepted a limited amount of money. They decided 4 meter top width. Now, other places around the country only have 2 meter top width, and it's like, so there's actually no stop bank standard in the country, which is some people in the academic world are working on trying to make a standard, and it might be 4 meter top width, it might be 8 meter. So far, it's been left up to each council to decide themselves.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't going to comment on this photo, but Cyclone Bola, and it would have been in that particular area. As you can see, this actually has got no vegetative cover on it. This stop bank, 14 days prior to Cyclone Bola, wasn't there. I could walk across from the orchard, climb the fence, and walk straight to the riverbed, and then they quickly rebuilt it. And so that's where that scouring has come in, and you can see where it was. And that's where we're involved in sandbagging and whatnot, and we got evacuated in the end out of the Trawford region. But my question really is, and it's a miracle that stop bank actually held without any vegetation on any time of compaction and so forth. So well done to the team of the time. My question is, are we able to manage the vegetation either through mowing? I know that we, as a practice, we actually would never have cattle or horses on stop banks, only sheep, and sheep wasn't really a viable option, but we actually use them as a management tool to actually compact, because they really compact the soil. And so that actually was a tool we used. Are we able to, with modern equipment, able to and knowledge, manage our vegetation so that actually it's for a longer duration?
That is the goal. One of the worries that I have is that with climate change, one of the things is we're hotter and drier, more risk of fire. And imagine if we had a really bad season that the grass died, and then you had a fire, and that was gone, and then you had a flood.
The locusts come next.
Yeah. I don't want to be a doomsday guy, but that's what I worry about. So managing that, the vegetation is huge.
On the vegetation question, if we go back to your good grass cover slide, what considerations have been made around like grass, shrubs, flax, or partial coverage of the slope?
The slopes, I think you'd probably still only get grass cover. I'm not the expert on that, so if someone else does know more, by all means speak up. It might be someone else in the council might know more about that than I do. So but so far, I think you'd expect the grass cover to be the most economical. You don't want too many roots that could cause piping into the stop bank. So it's like a balance between something like that. Yeah, and we want.
Chris, will we have the opportunity to look into that later on in the design phase?
So we did say we'd bring back options to you at the last meeting. So part of the reason we haven't brought a whole lot of options back is certainly for the Tūtira. There's not a lot of options around rerouting the stop banks. Certainly with the speed at which we need to move the IRG projects, it is more challenging to bring key steps to council committee and then to council. So that's something we need to understand. I think we're very much wanting to look into a more strategic approach into how we plant out our river areas. But I think on the river banks, we pretty much need to go with what we understand. But that's to say we can't look at alternatives, and part of the reason we're wanting to have some consultants help us with our decision making is to promote that out of the box thinking and to learn what other councils have done. So very much Bay of Plenty, who we recently visited, have a lot of sort of out of stream options with detention, storages, etc. So that's the sort of thinking we want to make sure we incorporate in our solutions, so we don't, miss any of those other opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foley.
Yeah, I found that graph really interesting of the historical data.
Oh, yes.
So just to make sure I'm reading that right, so you're saying the highest floods were back in the 1920s and 30s, is that what it's saying? Like the highest recorded?
Okay, I'm glad you pointed that out. I didn't want to look at that too closely, but you sort of think, okay, back then the recording method was not the same as we have now. So, and it is odd that the top three were back then. You have to treat it with a little bit of skepticism, but then also someone's done some work to generate those numbers. So I'll give them credit that they did, hopefully they did an adequate job, but it does leave me a little bit suspicious. Sometimes people doing this analysis say they only take the data that you have an instrument record for, and that would leave out all those. But I wanted to include them in because it's like, well, we think they happened, and it helps paint the picture of what, how much flow actually does come down there.
So, supplement, if you go back down further dots that you haven't marked there, is that showing a trend around increasing flood events as we?
No, like I say from climate change, or say no. Actually, it's oddly enough that's one thing where the flow records are not showing an effect from climate change right now. There's a natural variability in it anyways, and it's not like it's trending upwards. It's just still variable. We may see in 20, 30, 40 years it's starting to go up a bit, but it's so hard to pick out that amount in the noise that happens naturally.
And you show that in your coloured graph.
Yeah.
Where there's sort of an alignment of even the worst case to a 5%, they all arrive. Same
Exactly.
Place.
Yeah, and that's temperature increase. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of work on the impact on averages around climate change, but the impact to storm events, etc., there's not a lot of that work around, which is why we're currently struggling with the question of how do we include climate change. And NE was doing a whole lot of work to help understand that, but it's going to take them several years before they're at a point.
If I could add too, there's like maybe what we do see as well, or what the prediction is that you'll have something that used to be a 50-year event might be a 40 or 30 or 20-year event. So that's why I said the events around this area are more important to us than the peak, because if they happen every 5 years, that's the erosion problem that we have every 5 years, and it costs a lot to fix that. So every single flood event, we have to pay to fix the erosion problems because something happens. Yeah.
And last question, Councillor Foss.
Thanks very much. To your very first question, from what you presented there, it seems pretty wise to leave things at that 2040 kind of convergence date that you had on your first slide there. Yeah, right there. That seems wise from what you've told us. But one thing I think's, you know, I know this is the engineering department and we all love machines and building stuff, fair enough. But I just don't see a counter or a test from the environmental perspective of, even in the big, you know, your check-in chart that you have, which is really helpful. But what I just don't see is, well, actually potential wetlands or floodplains further up to slow a river down in these events, because yes, they are 1 in 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, but for 499 years, there's environmental impact of us channeling rivers. And so where's someone from that perspective testing having input to the conclusions you're coming up with? And don't get me wrong, you know, we need to save the town, of course.
I might just hand over to Martina, who's sitting at the back of the room here.
Yes, we are actually looking into it, because when we are gonna engage the consultant, we are not looking only from the engineering perspective, but we looking the environmental, the ecological, the all other aspects of it. So at the moment, it may seem like we looking just the engineering, the stop bank, the structure, but no, we're not. As a whole, Heretaunga Plains, we are looking into all other environmental aspects, factors, and ecological factors. So that is going to be all part of this project. So I can assure you.
Okay, so it's kind of those threads kind of come together in some form for one of your next presentations along the way?
So when we have more outcomes of those kind, because they are going to be, then we definitely will be coming back. We will be coming back here quite often anyway. So we will be proposing those, for example, wetlands is a good example. As there is definitely potential to create wetlands next to our flood protection scheme for many reasons. And that's just one of many other options we are considering to not just increase the level of protection, but also the environmental ecological factors.
Well, that's great. I'd love to see that potential, because that's what we do. It's looking after and enhancing our environment and looking after dwellings in the town.
Thank you. I think that's us for this item, and thank you both. If we can have a mover.
I'll move.
And a second. Sorry. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Make just 4 points. Firstly, I thought the report was excellent, and it was to some relief to realise that we had greater protection than we thought we did have. Because the assumption we had around this table was that we had 1 in 100 years, but you come back and say, well, no, we're a bit better than that.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. The second thing I'd like to say to you is that I agree with your strategy about reinforcing the parts which are going to give us the greatest weakness and greatest threat to us. I think that's a really sensible part. The third thing I thought was your point about 2040 is a time to rethink and make a decision. So it gives us 20 years. Let's do the work now, and 20 years come back and rethink about it. And I like the whole encompassing approach you've taken to it. So I felt the report was really good, and I'm very pleased with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I have nothing to comment. It was a great report. Thanks.
Thank you. So those who agree with noting the report, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next item, the Crown-funded flood resilience project.
Oh, bring back Rick.
No, I said we're going to have 2 more. This is going to be.
This will be a quick item.
This will be a quick item.
So this is just a quick update of where we're at in our funding.
We'll have lunch shortly. I think we're shortly on strike.
As read, David's here to help.
Sorry, actually, I've been interrupted. It's 2 hours max this morning we've gone over.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, we'll leave that item till after morning tea.
Health and safety. Angry councillors aren't happy.
Thank you, Leanne. 2 hours. We did start late, does that count? No.